Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa. I am so glad you're here taking the time to spend with me. And before we jump in, I want to let you know I have created a new webinar training that is available now, on the spot, immediately, if you're interested. How to make sex easy and fun for both of you, where nobody has to give in or give up. I'm so excited about this. I put a lot of work into developing it. You can go to intimacywithease.com/training and get immediate access, and I'd love to hear what you think. Today's show, I'm excited about this, like I always am. I am talking to Brian Gibney. He works as a surrogate partner, and we are going to talk about surrogate partner therapy. It's fascinating. I would imagine that plenty of you have never heard of this. Maybe a couple of you have. It was represented in a movie called Sessions, so that's where people may have heard of it. But it's about working with a professional who works on communication and relationship skills, but also physical and emotional intimacy, hands-on work, potentially. And this is what he does. And he talks about it in a beautiful way, what it is, how it works, who is it for, some of the ins and outs of this, how you find somebody, if this is a good fit for you. So I hope you get a lot out of the show. It's fascinating. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So Brian, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Oh, it's good to be here. I'm so excited to talk about the work that I do.
Yeah, this is cool. And I would imagine that plenty of the listeners have not heard of this. Like, this is going to be surprising to a lot of people that surrogate partner therapy even exists.
Yeah, absolutely. I give talks to therapists several times a year. And even within the communities of sex therapy, this is, while it's not a new thing, it's very new to the people that I talk to. So yeah. Really, most people, unless you have seen the movie The Sessions with Helen Hunt, haven't ever heard of surrogate partner therapy or sex surrogacy as it's referred to in that movie. Okay.
Remind me later I'd like to ask you, but not right this second, about what you thought of that movie and did they do a good job with it? But let's hold off on that. Let's start with talking about what is it? What is surrogate partner therapy?
Yeah. So surrogate partner therapy is an accompaniment to a therapeutic process that allows a client to sit in a relationship with a professional, a surrogate partner, who is able to be there to help them with relationship skills, communication skills, somatic or body awareness. And this may take the form of doing communication exercises or doing physical exercises. And physical exercises can be nurturing, they can be sensual, or they could be erotic. We do this in a therapeutic triad. So that means that we are always working with a collaborating clinician, a therapist. And while the clinician is not exactly in the room with us, we all have open flow of communication. So I am talking with the client is talking with the therapist is talking with me. We're all on the same team, trying to work with the client to help them overcome some of the major obstacles that they have not been able to fix through traditional therapy.
Okay. And why isn't this called sex surrogacy? I mean,
That's a
I
good
think even
question.
when I reached out to you, I called it that. So
Yeah. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
And for some time it was called sex therapy or sex surrogacy. And I think as the profession has evolved and as we've started to conceive of the work in what it really is, to name it sex surrogacy is actually just the sexuality component is such a small aspect of it. People may come to us with issues about sexuality, but those issues in sexuality often play out in the grander scale of a relationship. So when we say surrogate partner, we refer to ourselves as partners. We help clients with the broader scale of relationships. That may include sexuality, but that might also include vulnerability and communication skills.
Right. Okay. So just like I say with my clients all the time, I can't take sex out of the context of the rest of the relationship. That's why you use that term.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what do people come to you for? What kind of people? Like, how does this? Again, I'm imagining plenty of listeners. This is new. Like, what? Who does this and why? What's it especially useful for?
So just a little bit about myself. I am a cis hetero man. I work primarily with female clients, but sometimes I'll work with trans clients. I might even work with men who are having issues with masculinity. And the work is, of course, different based on every client that I'm working with. But many clients will come to me because they have struggled with relationships, intimate relationships, probably for their entire lives. This may be because they have had histories of abuse or assault. They might have a physical disability, which has limited not just their ability to physically go out and seek partners, but also their socialization. Sometimes clients have body dysmorphia or shame issues. And sometimes they really struggle with what our society has a tendency to do as far as sexual scripts. And they come to me wanting to find their way out of those sexual scripts into a healthier relationship.
So this sounds to me like more than just somebody's got a sexual dysfunction.
Yeah.
Right. Erectile dysfunction or something like that. Right. Like the issues go a little bit deeper or broader than that.
Yeah. So many male clients will come to surrogates with erectile dysfunctions. I even tend to not say dysfunction because it kind of brings a stigma of irreparable damage with it. And I don't think that's how I like to look at things. I think everybody is kind of all in this ebb and flow of who they are in the moment, and they might have various difficulties. But even if people have various difficulties, let's say pre-orgasmia, let's say erectile difficulties, those things all can feed back into body image, how we present in our bodies, how we live in our bodies, and how we relate to our partners. And that's all stacked on a certain set of expectations that we have in relationships that more often than not are just really not helpful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, of course, this is what I'm talking to people about in sex therapy all the time, right? And then what you're saying is sometimes, the talk therapy, people really need a physical part of this process to make change. Right?
And that's one of the great things about surrogate partner therapy is that in session with a client, you as a therapist may be able to say, in the abstract, this is how it's supposed to be. But what we are able to do is say, this is how it feels. This is how it feels to be in this moment. And I'm in this moment with you. And I am simultaneously wearing the hat of a professional and as another person who is in this relationship with you. And that's a very interesting relationship space to take up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you do this work with anybody who's partnered? Or is this, would somebody come in, they have a partner, would they come to you to do other work? Or do you work with couples at all?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Part of my own personal story, I'll get back to your original question.
Okay.
part of my personal story is that one of the things that motivated me to do this work is that my partner early on in our relationship was dealing with a lot of genital pain. And that was very early in our marriage. and threw a whole monkey wrench into our relationship, not just the sexual relationship, but everything else. And I had a conversation with her before I went into this work, and I said, how do you feel about this? And she said, imagine what it would have been like to have someone like you outside of our relationship who could have helped me, so you didn't have to both be husband and the person who was helping me. So the long answer to that question is there are some times when it is beneficial to have a surrogate partner who's working with someone who's in a partnership already. But because of the nature of the relationship between the surrogate partner and the client, that's challenging.
Yeah.
So as long as all parties are informed and we all know what's going on and we have good open communication, I think it could be really beneficial.
Okay.
But it's definitely not the norm.
Yeah, so more for people that are not in a relationship, have no other way to embody
and the reason why they come to find a surrogate partner is because they're struggling to be in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that people in relationship can't be struggling too, but
yes,
yeah,
right, okay. So how does this process work? What's it look to set this up? You're talking about that triad, which I think is important to kind of emphasize, and then start to finish, I guess, like how long does this go on? What do sessions look like? It seems like it could be quite a process.
Yeah, it can be a process. This is not a quick fix. This is not a do 2 or 3 sessions and you're done.
Right.
Usually what happens is we are kind of at the end of a therapeutic road that clients come to. And traditionally, clients will come because they're very, very frustrated with their inability to resolve their obstacles with traditional talk therapy. So most of the time, clients come to me and they have a history of therapy. And either the therapist or the client will have done some research. They know what surrogate partner therapy is. And they say, hey, this sounds like it really could be helpful. At that point in time, one or the other of them will reach out to me. And I'll do kind of a brief intake of this is what surrogate partner therapy is, find out a little bit about what their goals are. And if it's a good match, we all sit down as a therapeutic triad, and we kind of have a 3-way meeting where we say, this is what surrogate partner therapy can do. This is what it can't do, because this is not magic. It's another tool in the toolbox. It's not a cure-all, but it can do some really cool things. Talk about the therapeutic relationship between me and the client, between me and the therapist, and how we all have to communicate together, and talk about what we expect to do in the sessions. Part of that conversation is that surrogate partner therapy is incredibly open-ended. You can do a lot of different exercises, a lot of different phases of relationship, or you can just do one. It's depending on what the client needs. So if I work with a client and in the first phase of the relationship, we're doing a lot of communication and somatic self-awareness, body awareness. And there's a major epiphany that happens. It says, oh my God, I've been communicating with people wrong all my life, and I've never really been listening to my gut. And that's the one thing that they feel like they need. Great. That's the end of the work. More often than not, it takes reinforcing that message in a variety of different contexts. So we go from relationship skills, how we talk, how we communicate, how we share space together. And we build on that with various somatic exercises, so touch-based exercises. There can be nurturing touch. There can be sensual touch. There can be erotic touch. And if it's relevant to the client, there can be specific sexual touch. So we continue to do the self-awareness, the communication. We get very meta and geeky about feelings, body feelings and emotional feelings all the way through this. And we practice those things in real time.
And this touch is 2-way.
It's two-way touch, yeah.
Like, I know I've spoken to some, I can't remember if it was certain
somatic
tantra teacher.
Yeah,
some people that, it's definitely one way and the practitioner is, stays dressed or,
Yeah, that's one of the powerful things about surrogate partner therapy is that what reinforces the message for the client is that I am sitting in the relationship with them. I'm not pretending to do something. They get to practice both receiving and giving to me.
Yeah.
And that is a really important part of relationships.
Right. Right.
Before we veer off too much, I want to talk about one of the most important parts of the work is that towards the end of the work, we're not just doing this in our bubble. And then when the client reaches their goals, we're saying, bye-bye, have fun, good luck. We have to recontextualize the work outside of our bubble.
Oh, okay.
Say, how does this now relate to other people in your life? And how do you translate from this relationship into other organic relationships? And as we do that, we're slowly starting to dissolve the relationship in a healthy, planned way and get closure.
Yeah, so it's not just, boom, we're done, shut the door.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine that's like a weaning off of a surrogate partner into, lifelong.
And the therapist is their role in that is huge, right? Because when I'm gone, they are going to be helping the client transition to other relationships.
Right. And is a client, it sounds like they would be meeting with the therapist pretty consistently while they're also working with you. It's not like you take a break from therapy, Yeah,
no, this is not an either or thing. This is, even though we're not in the same room together, this is all happening kind of in parallel tracks, and we're all talking to each other.
Yeah.
Because things, especially as you poke up against the difficult, tender areas that people have, it gets hard.
Yeah.
And the important role that a therapist has in this therapeutic triad is they are the external eyes on the relationship. It's one thing for me to be able to say something to a client. It's a whole nother thing for this unbiased other professional to be able to say something.
Yeah. I have so many questions. In terms of the therapists you work with, I would imagine there are people that see a therapist whose therapist is not willing to get involved in this somehow, isn't willing to touch it, right? And then maybe you're having to find a therapist to serve as the third leg of this stool a little bit, or how do you navigate working with therapists who are not familiar with this work? So
the vast majority of therapists I've worked with are not familiar with it, especially being in Virginia on the East Coast. It is a traditionally West Coast California thing. Not surprisingly. So a lot of therapists, this is very, very new for, and sometimes professionally uncomfortable because you are introducing touch and relationship that by a therapist's own code of ethics is not allowed in their relationship with a client.
Right.
But I would say almost all of the therapists that I have worked with have never worked with this before.
Okay.
And we sit down and we have a long talk about what the process looks like. What are some of the obstacles along the way? What are some of the sticking points that people might get into? And just like my relationship with a client, my relationship with a therapist is part of the work. There are almost always points in the work where therapists will reach a limit to their comfort.
Yeah, I bet.
We sit down and we examine that. That's part of life. That's not even a part of this work. That's about wow, what are my sticking points and how do I move past those? Right.
So it's not, I would imagine that a lot of the therapists you work with are not certified sex therapists, right? They must just be sort of, my air quotes here, regular therapists.
Right. Yeah, I work with a lot of certified sex therapists, but I would say maybe half of them aren't. So pretty even distribution. And both types of therapists, whether they're certified sex therapists or whether they are regular therapists, bring different things to the table. The nice thing about a regular therapist is that they will have often an entirely different skill set than I'll have that is really relevant to what the client's specific needs are. So that can be really helpful.
Yeah. Hey, it's Jess. I'm just taking a little break to invite you to my free monthly webinars that I do on a variety of topics that always include an open Q&A session with me at the end. I'm doing these monthly. If you want to hear about them, be invited so you can register. Make sure you join my mailing list. You can go to bettersexpodcast.com/list. And you talked about having a meeting and if it's a fit proceeding. So there's this question for you personally about what's a fit for you and how you make this judgment, but also about the profession in general. Like, what are contraindications? When is this not the recommended approach?
Right.
What do people need to be for evaluating their own fit?
That is a really juicy question, right? Because when people often think about what is a fit, they immediately skip to the sex part. And they think, oh, do you have to be attracted to a client? Does a client have to be attracted to you? And the answer is, well, that might be nice. Absolutely not. That's not what the work is about. That's not what I mean when I say a fit.
Okay.
I more mean a therapeutic fit. And that is based on a couple of things. Where is the client in their own therapeutic journey? Are they ready to do this work? Have they had enough experience where they can be introspective and know how to do that kind of process? If a client has severe mental disabilities, that is not a good fit. If a client has borderline personality disorders, that is not a good fit. If a client is dealing with substance abuse, that is not a good fit. If a client is in a relationship where the spouse is actively abusive, I don't think that is a good fit either.
Mm-hmm.
So what a good fit is someone who understands enough of the therapeutic process and their own evolution that they say, this is something I really need to add to fill in a space that I can't get anywhere else. And who is ready to be inquisitive and open and, introspective about this process.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm trying to think how to word this. What about people that maybe haven't got the capacity for true consent? I'm thinking about somebody with a severe, real abuse or trauma history who thinks they want this and is, says they're in, but how do you develop the confidence that somebody is really choosing this?
That is a great question. So consent is something that grows out of our relationship. That's why we don't start off with sexuality. That's why sexuality is way, way, way in the distant future. So what we do is we start off with consent of, do you want to sit in the room with me? Okay, we give them informed consent, and we're constantly asking for that consent. Consent, in any other relationship, is revocable. If they don't want to continue the work after the first 2 sessions, fine.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of communication and consent exercises that will help us bridge the gap and help them really check in with themselves and learn what consent feels like. One of my favorite exercises to do in the beginning is called May I, Will You? And we ask each other a series of may I or will you questions.
Yeah. And say just a little bit more so people understand what that is.
Yeah. So I may ask, may I look at your cell phone and check your text messages? Right? Now, in normal organic conversation, we would think that we're just going to answer yes or no, but we really break it down in surrogate partner therapy. In the first phase of this work, when we're asking a may I or will you question, the response is always going to be no.
Okay.
So that's to help both of us familiarize ourselves with saying no and hearing no, feeling in our bodies what that feels like.
Yeah.
The next phase of the work, after we ask may I or will you questions, and they can be completely goofy, will you do 10 jumping jacks? Or they can be, will you put your head on my lap?
Okay.
The answer to those questions in the second phase is always going to be yes. There's not going to be any follow through. There's going to be an inauthentic yes that's hanging out there. And then we get super geeky about the yes. How did that yes feel to you? Did you see how my body reacted to a yes where I was excited about saying yes? And how did that differ from when I was saying a yes that I didn't feel really comfortable to?
Yeah.
As we're doing this, we're both modeling the behavior and we're familiarizing the client with how that behavior feels in themselves. In the next phase, I do something called exploring ambivalence, where we weigh what a yes scenario might feel like and a no scenario might feel like. And the fun thing about that is we get to say, okay, things may not always be 100% yes or 100% no. What are the different factors that weigh into our yes and our no? And then we get to discuss them. That is what developing consent is all about. Like, what makes your no a yes? And what are the conditions where your yes might turn into a no?
Right.
Only after we do that do we start to explore authentic yeses and nos, and then authentic yeses and nos with follow through, with actual action.
Yeah.
So this can be a really long process that might take several sessions, but it's really, really cool. Every time I do this, both with clients and friends in my personal life, it's mind-blowing because we don't really break down how we are both self-aware and have conversations with other people.
Yeah.
And once you do that, it is incredibly empowering, especially for people who are not used to being able to give authentic consent.
Yeah. And it seems to me this bridges into a conversation about the legality of this, the ethics of this. And I'm thinking about the risk, which you're certainly trying to mitigate for clients, but also for you.
Yeah.
Like, again, I'm sort of thinking, how do you know you have consent and this isn't going to come back and bite you somehow, right? Like,
right.
What are the sort of legal and ethical issues that people should be aware of, considering?
Sure. So as far as ethics are concerned, I will stand by the fact that surrogate partner therapy is incredibly effective. And I think it's really important that clients have access to the most effective treatment. I think it's highly unethical to continue to do the same thing over and over again if it's not working. So this is a conversation I have a lot with therapists. This is the conversation I have a lot when I speak at conferences and give lectures. Like, this is, while we are very comfortable in our erotophobic society of the neck up work, and therapists have found a comfortable distance between sexuality and their professional world by keeping that distance, what surrogate partner therapy allows you to do is bridge that gap. So I kind of have in my own professional ethics, this is what I do. It is on the table, and that's okay. And by it is on the table, I mean emotional and physical intimacy. But that is not unethical. What would be unethical for a talk therapist, a clinician, is not unethical or unprofessional for me.
Right.
But then we get into the legality of it. Right. And that's what everybody wants to know about.
Exactly.
Like I like every time I give a talk, I roll my eyes like, okay, here we go again. But it's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to lose their therapeutic license. Nobody wants to get arrested. You certainly don't want to expose a client to that legal repercussion.
Right.
So the reality is that there's never been any legal action, criminal action taken against a client or a surrogate for working on this work.
Okay.
One of the reasons for that is because if we do get into erotic or sexual work, it's insulated by this larger therapeutic bubble. The financial transactions that happen are about doing the therapy, not about doing the act. And that's a distinction that most lawyers are willing to make. In the 50 years that surrogate partner therapy has been around, I'm not aware of any criminal actions that have been taken against anybody.
Or license revocation for a therapist.
So there have been times where therapists have been put under review for working with a surrogate partner. But the issue isn't that they were working with a surrogate partner. The issue was they didn't do their due diligence when working with the surrogate partner. And when getting back to that conversation about, is this client a good fit? The client wasn't a good fit. And the surrogate wasn't a good fit. The surrogate was uneducated. The surrogate did not have good professional and ethical boundaries. So that was just a cocktail of bad things waiting to happen. So, yeah.
So how that leads into how do you pick someone who's qualified, trained, ethical? Like, what is there some certifying body here? Because it seems like it could be a little bit of a shot in the dark for people if they're just Googling surrogate partner,
Yeah. And there can be, once you, when I started this work, I had no idea about this world that was out there. What's the difference between a surrogate partner and a somatic sex educator and a sexological body worker and a sacred intimate and a tantra professional and like everything. Yeah. So one of the ways that you can kind of vet a surrogate partner is you look for their training. I have been trained by IPSA, but I'm also currently a co-founder of a new organization called Surrogate Partner Collective. So we're going to be responsible for training, for education and advocacy, and for continuing education of surrogate partners.
Okay.
So doing the homework about the individual practitioner, that's a way that you can start. But then, just like you would with any other profession, get professional recommendations. See how they talk about the work. If they are talking about doing the work in just 3 sessions and they jump to sexuality, that should raise some warning flags.
Okay.
If they talk about establishing good communication dynamics, having informed consent along the way, working in a therapeutic triad, and making sure that a therapist has open communication between the surrogate and the therapist, those should all be good indicators that the practitioner knows what they're doing.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say there's not going to be any bumps along the road, but hopefully you have the mechanisms to deal with them in the real time. And hopefully it will not spiral out of control to the point where things get to the point where your client is unhappy, your client feels like the relationship between the therapist and the client has been inappropriate, and they've been led astray. So yeah, bottom line is, if you do your homework, it shouldn't be a problem. The problem is when people feel ashamed of doing this, they don't talk about it, so they don't do their homework.
Right.
So talk to your colleagues, talk to certifying bodies like Surrogate Partner Collective. I've done webinars where I teach about surrogate partner therapy. Take those webinars, educate yourself as much as possible.
And you mentioned IPSA and then the new Surrogate Partner Collective. Is there any other organization that does training that people should be aware of that would be, feeling like, oh, this person's got some background? Is there? Right.
There have been other organizations that kind of ebb and flow over the past few decades. The ones that I've spoken about have the most robust training. So they're the ones that I rely on the most.
Okay. All right. And if you don't mind, just sort of personally, or I've got so many more questions, but like,
oh yeah, bring it. I'm ready.
You doing this work, okay? So you apparently married. I found out you have a daughter. I'm curious what that work is like for you in the context of people are thinking a regular life. How do you do this? And what is it like if people fall in love, or if you you developed feelings, and you mentioned questions. Like not needing to be attracted. I'm like, I guess.
Yeah, and that really gets down to like, what's the line between personal Brian and professional Brian?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because you show up as you in there. I know that that's part of the work is you've got to be the person too. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's just bite off like familial and personal relationships first. Okay. My daughter, who is almost 13 now, kind of rolls her eyes and she's like, "Oh, Dad, are you talking about sex again?" Oh. But this is just my job. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about clients specifically over the dinner table, but she does know what I do. She does know I talk about sex and relationships all the time. Sometimes it's annoying. Sometimes her friends are like, "That's kind of interesting." And she's like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it. It's my dad." But that's pretty much as far as it goes. Mm-hmm. In my personal life, so I'm non-monogamous, which means that, I have ethical relationships, multiple ethical relationships happening concurrently. Most of the people that I date are very curious about this work, and they think it's cool rather than challenging. For the people that are in monogamous relationships, there's a very distinct difference between the work them that shows up and the personal them. And that's a negotiation they have with their own partners.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. What about love?
But what about love? Yeah. So you're going through this incredible process, this incredible transformative process where you get to be vulnerable with another person. You get to know them. You get to be potentially sexually intimate with a person, which has its a whole nother set of feelings. And there can be love. The question is like, what flavor of love, right? Is this like we're on the same team working together of, as a same goal and having this base level of I love you as a human being love? Or is it a more intense emotional connection? You can have anything in the spectrum, and it can be shared, it can be mutual, it can be one way or another. There are absolutely no rules, and every relationship I have with a client is different than the other one. Question is, what do you do with it? What are your expectations around it? Because of my life in non-monogamy, I understand that there's an ebb and flow to relationships. And one of the things that I really like to impart into clients is an understanding that a relationship can be beautiful and wonderful, and it can end in a healthy way. And that's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I would imagine that becomes an important part of the work, is if somebody were to fall in love and, that helping them put that in context and move on, and like we can have closure.
So one of the metaphors that I really love to use is the summer romance. You have this very short, brief, intense relationship that is transformative. You grow as a person, but it's going to end right from the very beginning. That doesn't make the end any less difficult. But what you eventually do is you say it's over, and I get to look back on that fondly and say that was an amazing period in my life. It's changed me, and I'm a different person for it. And that happens all the time in surrogate partner therapy.
Yeah. All right. So where do people learn more about you, or any other, links or websites or resources you want to sort of, promote or talk about right now?
Yeah. So my own personal website is bgsurrogatetherapy.com. And you can also look at surrogatepartnercollective.org. I do a lot of work with ASEC, the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And, I'm sure a quick Google search will find a whole bunch of videos and lectures that I've given.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely invite people to reach out and contact me directly. I love having organic conversations about this because it's so nuanced. Mm-hmm. Whether they're clients or whether they're therapists interested in surrogate partner therapy.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been, in my own mind, it's like tip of the iceberg, because I've got even more questions, but it's a wonderful starting point. So
yeah, I could talk about this for an entire weekend and still come up with new stuff to talk about.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.